Germany, January 1944. The winter sky above the Reich was the color of cold steel, stretched thin over a nation that was beginning to realize quietly, reluctantly, that the tide of the war had turned. But at Luftwaffe headquarters, pride still lived, pride and denial. The same denial that had carried Germany through the catastrophic losses of 1943. For months, American bombers had hammered German industry. It wasn't just the raids they were used to those. It was the relentlessness. The Americans didn't fly with strategy alone. They flew with resources. Thousands of aircraft, rivers of aviation fuel, factories that produced bombers like wheat. And the Luftwaffe, though still dangerous, was bleeding. Every mission cost them pilots they could not replace. Every interception drained the last drops of their precious aviation fuel. Every filled coffin added another hole to an already collapsing air defense wall. Still, the Germans fought. They had no choice. On this particular morning, radar operators at Stellung-Darmstadt detected the unmistakable echo of another bomber stream. Heading east, more than 600 aircraft, high, steady, and determined, the Americans were coming again. In the operations room, Oberst Adolf Galland, inspector of fighters, leaned over the large command map. His face normally confident, almost smug, carried a tension that only his closest staff could recognize. Cigarette smoke curled around his head as he studied the formation reports. Heavy bombers approaching. The Ruhr, a standard mission. Profile. But then the radar operator called out. Again, additional aircraft. Multiple squadrons. Moving with the bombers. Galland looked up. Thunderbolts. The operator hesitated, then shook his head. No, Herr Oberst. These are flying farther than Thunderbolts should be able to fly. That sentence so simple, so innocent, was the first crack in the Luftwaffe's understanding of the skies above them. Galland straightened. Altitude, 24,000 feet and climbing. Thunderbolts couldn't do that this far into Germany. P-38s struggled in the cold. Nothing matched these signatures, nothing the Germans knew of. Something cold squeezed Galland's throat. Meanwhile, at an airfield near Kassel, the scramble sirens were already screaming. Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Weber sprinted across icy concrete, breath steaming as ground crews shoved chocks away from the wheels of his Bf-109 G6. Engines rattled and roared, propellers clawing at the freezing air. Mechanics barely completed their last checks before stepping back from the spinning blades. Weber climbed into his cockpit, slamming the canopy shut. His gloves were stiff with cold. The air stank of gasoline, oil, and wet earth. Wir Schwarmbereitmachen. Came the order in his headset. Weber grinned. Another day, another American raid, another chance to tear holes in their oversized, arrogant bombers. He advanced the throttle, and the 109 leapt forward, wheels bouncing on the rough runway until it lifted gracefully into the pale sky. Minutes later, Weber and his wingman, Unteroffizier Emil Cross, were climbing rapidly through thin clouds, frost forming on the edges of their canopies. Bomber stream at bearing 090, Weber reported, spotting the glittering silver formation ahead. B-17s, their contrails stretched like white scars across the sky. Krause's voice crackled through the radio. I see no escorts. All clear so far. Weber's lips curled. Perfect. He switched to the strike frequency. Adlergruppe, this is Wolf Lead. Prepare for attack dive. No escorts in sight. Dozens of German fighters formed into attack lines behind him, climbing higher to angle their dives. Weber pushed his nose forward. His guns were ready. His engine was screaming. And just as he lined up a bomber in his sights, he saw movement. Not above, not below, but behind, sliding out of the bright sun like predators emerging from tall grass. His heart froze. Long nose, bubble canopy, sleek fuselage. Fast, far too fast. Achtung! Mustangs! Weber yelled, voice cracking. Cross swore violently over the radio. They had heard rumors. They had seen intelligence notes. But most believed the reports exaggerated. The P-51 Mustang was supposed to be a threat only near the channel, not deep over central Germany. Yet here they were, dozens of them, coming in disciplined, deadly formation. The first volley of .50 caliber fire ripped through the air. A German fighter exploded in a burst of flame and debris. Another spiraled into the clouds. A third dove desperately, a Mustang glued to its tail. Weber tried to brake. The G6 rolled, but it felt sluggish, heavy compared to the Mustang slicing through the sky behind him. He pulled hard left. The Mustang stayed with him. He dove. It followed. My God! Cross yelled. They're faster than us at altitude. Weber barely shook the Mustang on his tail by diving to dangerously low altitude. Sweat rolled down his spine. These weren't P-47s, these weren't P-38s, this was something else. Something designed for one purpose, to hunt them. At high altitude. The bomber crews watched the chaos unfold. Escort's doing good work today, AB-17 tail gunner muttered, watching Mustangs carve through German fighters inside a P-51 cockpit. Captain William Overstreet gunned his engine, feeling the smooth surge of the Merlin engine beneath him. He locked onto ABF-109 trying to escape the battle. That one's running, his wingman said. Overstreet smiled. They always run, the Mustang dove. Bullets stitched across the German fighter's wings. Black smoke erupted. The 109 pitched forward and disappeared beneath the clouds. Overstreet climbed back toward the bombers, and kept climbing. His fuel gauge was still comfortable. He wasn't headed home. Not for hours. Back at Luftwaffe command, Gallant stared at the reports pouring in. American escorts still. Overhead, Mustangs following us past. We spotted they're not turning back. He lit another cigar with trembling fingers. This wasn't a bad day. This wasn't a setback. This was systemic collapse, he whispered to himself quietly, bitterly. Diver damned Engländer haben ihnen ihr Motoren gegeben. The damned English gave them their engines. The Merlin-powered P-51 had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. The winter of 1943 pressed down over Europe like a steel lid. In the frozen forests of Germany and the battered farms of France, civilians looked up at the distant drone of engines and felt only dread. By now, every European knew the sound of American bombers, deep, rolling, relentless, like the earth itself growling. But inside those bombers, fear ruled. The Boeing B-17 crews had a phrase they whispered under their breath. The first 200 miles belonged to U.S., the next 400 belonged to the Luftwaffe. And they were right. Every time the bomber streams crossed into German airspace, a sense of doom spread through the formation. Men tightened their oxygen masks. Gunners checked and rechecked their .50 cals. Waist gunners leaned toward the cold open windows, watching the first specks appear on the horizon, black dots moving in perfect formation. Messerschmitts, Focke-Wulfs, wolves closing in on the herd. The Luftwaffe wasn't just good. They were masters. They attacked with mathematical precision, head-on passes, diving slashes, climbing turns. They cut through bomber formations like a blade through fabric. Each attack burst scattered burning planes across the sky. And the bombers? They had to just keep going forward. They called it flying the gauntlet. They did it nearly every day. But then, something started happening. Something strange. Something subtle. It started as rumors from bomber groups, from radar stations, from Luftwaffe radio intercepts, reports of a new American fighter appearing where it shouldn't be, far deeper into German territory than any Allied fighter could possibly fly. No one believed it at first. At that time, the Allies relied mainly on Spitfires, fast but short-legged, P-47 Thunderbolts, durable but still limited, early P-38 models, struggling with European weather, P-40s, completely outclassed. None of them had the range to escort bombers all the way to their targets and back, and the Luftwaffe knew this. They depended on it. Without fighter escort, bomber crews died in horrifying numbers. Entire crews vanished on missions. Some squadrons rotated out only to return months later to find every man they once knew gone. This was the reality, until the rumors grew into sightings. Pilots reported a long, sleek silhouette. German aces claimed to see a silver shape diving from high altitude. Bomber crews swore they caught glimpses of it during desperate battles. A few even said they heard this phrase on Luftwaffe radio chatter: "A new Mustang is in the air." The idea seemed insane. The P-51 Mustang existed, but not like this. Not in any meaningful numbers. Not with the range to fly escort over Germany. Yet day by day, the sightings increased. A German pilot, Major Theodor Weissenberger, supposedly reported, "I saw a fighter I did not recognize. It climbed like nothing I have seen before." Another Luftwaffe officer wrote in his diary, "If the Americans bring these Mustangs in force, the war in the air will change." Still, the German high command dismissed the reports as exaggeration, wishful thinking from frightened men. Meanwhile, deep under the cold English skies, the transformation had already begun. At airfields across England, Debden, Leiston, Bodney, Bodisham ground crews were working around the clock. Wooden crates marked Ellison engine were being removed. New crates marked with bold letters were arriving. Packard Merlin engine handle. With extreme care, the British Rolls-Royce Merlin, built under American license, was being fitted into the Mustang airframe. This changed everything. Literally everything. With the Merlin engine, it climbed faster, it dove harder, it performed better above 15,000 feet, it flew longer, much longer. It matched or exceeded any German fighter at nearly any altitude, and with the new drop tanks, the Mustang could suddenly do the impossible. Follow the bombers all the way to Berlin, and then escort them back home. But the Germans didn't know that yet. They only noticed one thing: every week, the strange new fighter seemed to appear farther east. Every week, the impossible fighter got deeper into the Reich. First sightings came near the coast, then 40 miles inland, then 100, then 200, until finally one Luftwaffe pilot described seeing a Mustang near Brunswick and wrote, "God help us if they can reach this far." Inside the Reich Air Ministry in Berlin, panic quietly began to take root. Not publicly, not officially, but behind closed doors. Absolutely. Intelligence officers brought reports, testimony, intercepts, radar logs. Generals argued. Staff officers whispered. Engineers analyzed blurry reconnaissance photos. One chilling assessment landed on the desk of Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Göring. A long-range Mustang Escort is now probable. Göring scoffed. He refused to believe it, but deep down, even he sensed something was shifting. For 2 years, the Luftwaffe had dominated the air beyond fighter range. They ruled the skies where only bombers dared to fly. It was their sanctuary, a grim, deadly sanctuary. But there's nonetheless, now, a predator was entering their domain. A predator they didn't understand yet. A predator they couldn't yet stop. In early 1944, the shift became unmistakable. American bomber groups reported something shocking. Enemy fighters are breaking off earlier. For the first time in years, German pilots were no longer committing to deep, sustained attacks. Their ambushes were shorter, their formations weaker, their aggression pulled back. The bomber crews noticed it first, then the intelligence officers, then the generals. The Luftwaffe wasn't losing yet, but it was hesitating. Because somewhere out there, somewhere above the clouds, Mustangs were waiting. Maybe one, maybe 10, maybe none. But the Germans didn't know, and that uncertainty alone reshaped the battlefield. A psychological shift, a strategic tremor, a storm gathering before anyone could see the full outline. The day the Luftwaffe realized the sky was changing was close. Very close. The bombers still flew alone. The Mustang presence was still scattered. The Americans hadn't revealed their full hand, not yet. But the whispers had started. The unease had begun. And high above the frozen fields of Europe, the Luftwaffe's once invincible hunters started looking over their shoulders. For the silver ghost they feared was coming. Because soon, very soon, they would meet it face to face, and on that day, the sky would no longer belong to them. The morning that marked the beginning of the Luftwaffe's unraveling didn't start with explosions. It started with silence, a cold, high-altitude silence at 25,000 feet, where the oxygen is thin, the air is razor-sharp, and the horizon curves like the edge of a blade. The bombers stream hundreds of B-17s and B-24s moved like a steel river across the German sky. Their engines droned in unison, a mechanical heartbeat echoing for miles. Inside the lead B-17, the radio crackled every few seconds. Keep formation. Stay tight. Watch your altitude. The men were tense. They had every reason to be. This stretched deep inside the Reichswehr where the Luftwaffe normally struck hardest. This was where bomber crews watched flames pour from buddy planes, where parachutes drifted like dying snowflakes, where gunners screamed warnings that came too late. But today, something was different. They were deep, far deeper than any bomber crew liked to be. Every man expected the attack. Every man anticipated the first black specks appearing like ink dots on the pale sky. But the attack didn't come. Not at first. Not at the usual distances. Instead, the bombers flew untouched for a few eerie minutes that felt like stolen time. Then it happened. At 10 o'clock high, black dots appeared, dozens of them. The call rang out. Fighters! Fighters! Gunners swung their turret handles instantly. The plane's belly guns whirred. The top turret spun so fast the metal clattered through their gun sights. The bomber crew saw them coming in perfect, chilling formation. Messerschmitt Bf-109s, Focke-Wulf 190s, tight, organized, deadly. The Luftwaffe was here. The bombers braced for the usual chaos head-on passes. Cannon shells ripping through wings, explosions scattering the formation. But something was different today. The attacking fighters hesitated. For the first time in countless missions, the Luftwaffe's opening assault wasn't a full-speed commitment. It was cautious, measured. Almost wary. The squadron leader of the German formation barked orders over the radio. Hold position. Something is wrong. Check your altitude, something is above us." Above them? Bomber crews heard the call through radio intercepts and felt a shiver. Above the German fighters? At 29,000 feet. Something glinted in the sunlight. At first it looked like a reflection, a speck, a trick of the glare. Then it grew larger and larger, until its shape became unmistakable. A long nose, a bubble canopy, wide laminar wings, a silver fuselage, a Mustang. The bombers couldn't believe their eyes. One gunner screamed into his intercom, "Jesus Christ, they followed us this far?" Another shouted, "Where the hell did he come from?" Because until this moment, even the bomber crews themselves did not fully understand what the Americans had built in secret. A lone P-51 slicing through the air above Berlin? That should have been impossible. Yet there it was, diving straight at the German fighters. The Luftwaffe squadron leader swore loudly over the radio, "Mustang! Mustang, break! Break now!" But it was too late. The silver fighter hit the formation like a falling sword. The P-51 pilot's name was Captain James Fang. Ellison, 20-6 years old. Reckless, brilliant, born to fly. He had flown P-40s. He had flown P-47s. He had seen bomber formations torn apart. He had lost friends in burning cockpits. And now, in the Mustang, he finally had a weapon that let him strike back. Ellison rolled his plane into a vertical dive, the Merlin engine screaming as the altimeter numbers spun down. His target was a 109, trying to position for a head-on attack on the bomber stream. The German pilot saw him too late. Ellison fired a controlled burst short, precise, deadly. Tracers tore through the Messerschmitt's wing root. The German fighter snapped sideways, trailing smoke. The Luftwaffe formation scattered instantly. The bombers roared with cheers. For the first time in months, they saw something they had longed for, the hunters running from the hunted. But Ellison wasn't alone. Not anymore. 2 more Mustangs broke through the upper cloud layer. Then 3 more appeared at medium altitude. Then 5 more slid in beside the bomber formation. It was subtle at first, a trickle, not a wave. But it was undeniable. The American long-range escort had arrived. And they were not just escorting the first 200 miles, or the next 400. They were escorting all the way to the target. For the Germans, it was like seeing ghosts materialize out of thin air, ghosts that could climb, turn, dive, and accelerate as well or better than anything the Luftwaffe had. The German squadron leader made a desperate call. Regroup to the east. Avoid turning fights. Mustangs have altitude advantage. He knew the truth. If a Mustang was above you, you were already in trouble. The air around the bombers erupted into chaos. Mustangs slashed into the German fighters. .50 cal shells hammered through wings. Engines belched fire. Parachutes blossomed. Ellison climbed sharply after another fleeing 190. The Luftwaffe pilot tried to outdive him, but the Merlin engine tore through the air, closing the distance effortlessly. A second burst, a flash. Another German fighter spiraled down. Inside the bomber stream, gunners watched in absolute disbelief. They're running. The Germans are actually running. And they were. The Luftwaffe fighters peeled away in 1s and 2s, losing altitude, abandoning their angles, trying to escape the silver predators tearing through their formations. But the moment that truly broke the Luftwaffe's confidence came 10 minutes later. Ellison climbed back to altitude. His fuel report crackled over the radio. He expected the worst. He expected the usual short escort window. But HQ radioed back. "You are clear to continue escort. Range is green. Repeat, range is green." Ellison looked down at his fuel gauge and laughed. He wasn't anywhere near empty. The Germans didn't know it yet. But Ellison did. Every P-51 up here did. For the first time in the war, American fighters could escort bombers to Berlin, fight over Berlin, and then escort them back home. The Luftwaffe pilots who saw the Mustang still on station, still aggressive, still diving from altitude deep inside Germany, came to a chilling realization. If they can stay here this long, the war in the air is finished. That was the moment the Luftwaffe began to break. Not because of a single battle, not because of a single kill, but because of what the Mustangs represented. A relentless escort that wouldn't leave, a predator that followed bombers everywhere, a fighter that erased the Luftwaffe's greatest advantage. The sky no longer belonged to Germany. The tide had turned, and every man in the air that day, American or German, knew it. The Luftwaffe's retreat that morning wasn't just a tactical withdrawal. It was a fracture, a crack across the surface of a machine that had once dominated the skies of Europe for years. Luftwaffe doctrine was built around one truth: attack the bombers first, force them to break, then finish the escorts. This tactic had worked against P-47s, P-38s, and every other short-legged escort the Americans had tried to field. The Luftwaffe pilots knew exactly when the escorts would peel away. They even had maps showing the escort cut-off zones, invisible lines the Americans could never cross. But today, those lines no longer existed. At 30,000 feet, Major Heinrich Lother looked over his shoulder and felt something unfamiliar: fear. He was one of Germany's seasoned aces. 61 victories. He had battled over France, Russia, and Sicily. He had fought Hurricanes, Spitfires, Yaks, Mustangs, Lightnings, and Thunderbolts. He had survived everything. But what he saw behind him now set his pulse hammering. A P-51 wasn't just chasing him. It was closing in effortlessly. Lothar pushed his 109's nose down, diving hard. The air screamed across his canopy. His altimeter spun. He pushed past the red line of his airframe. But the Mustang followed, and it wasn't struggling. It wasn't losing distance. It was gaining. Lother barked into his radio. These new Mustangs, they're too fast in the dive. They're too stable. They'd static swallowed the rest. He had spent years believing the Messerschmitt held the advantage in the dive. Not today. Inside the P-51, Lieutenant Jack Carson grinned. The chase had become personal. He'd lost his best friend, Charlie Green, when Luftwaffe fighters shredded their bomber formation last winter. Charlie burned alive in a spiraling B-17 over Munster. Carson had never seen the pilot responsible, but he had sworn that when the day came, when he finally had a fighter that could match the Germans, he would pay the Luftwaffe back. Today was that day. He squeezed the trigger. A burst of .50 cal slugs walked across the sky, then across the tail section of Lothar's 109. Metal burst from the fuselage. A trail of smoke spiraled from the engine. But the German ace kept fighting. He rolled, dove again, pulled up sharply. The Mustang stuck to him like a shadow. The P-51's bubble canopy gave Carson a full wraparound view. He could see everything: the roll, the dive, the climb, the desperate slipping turn. Carson pressed him harder. Another burst. Lothar's right wingtip erupted into sparks. The German ace yanked the canopy release. His aircraft rolled into a final spiral. A lone parachute blossomed. Carson didn't cheer. He just whispered, "For Charlie." Meanwhile, across the bomber stream, chaos was turning into something worse for the Luftwaffe. Clarity. Squadron after squadron of German fighters attempted their time-proven tactic. Dive from a high altitude, cut through the bomber box, escape downward, ray climb, and repeat. But every dive ended the same way: a Mustang dropping in behind them, hunting them down like prey. The Luftwaffe pilots had always relied on the Bf-109's ability to break away. Today, it wasn't working. Every time they dove, a P-51 was waiting. Every time they turned, a P-51 outturned them. Every time they tried to regain altitude, the Mustangs were already there. Captain Ellison led a 3-ship flight above the bombers and watched it unfold. He could see the old German tactics collapsing in real time. "They're not adapting," Ellison muttered. "They can't adapt," replied his wingman. And that was the truth. The Luftwaffe had designed their entire defensive system around the idea that American fighters could not reach Berlin. Now they could, and they weren't just able to reach Berlin. They could fight over Berlin, and then fight again on the way home. No German tactic could compensate for that. On the ground, German radar stations were relaying panic. Radio operators shouted, "More Mustangs! More Mustangs! They're escorting the entire formation. Scramble reserves. The bombers still have fighter cover. Repeat, they still have cover." Colonel Friedrich Stair, overseeing air defense from a command bunker near Braunschweig, stared at the reports stacking up on his desk. Every one of them painted the same picture: Mustangs diving from every angle, German fighters unable to regain altitude, bomber formations unbroken, Luftwaffe losses mounting at a pace unseen since the Battle of Britain. Stair leaned forward and pressed his fingers to his temples. "This isn't possible," he muttered. But he knew it was. The Americans had created an escort fighter that broke the logic of the war. The P-51 had range. It had speed. It had firepower. It had climb rate. It had endurance. It had altitude superiority. It had visibility. It had everything the Germans lacked. The Luftwaffe had no answer. Not for the first time. Stair whispered a thought most German officers were afraid to say aloud: "We lost the war." The moment these Mustangs entered it, back in the sky, the breaking point finally came. A fresh staffel of FW-190s attacked the bomber box. They dove in, fast, disciplined, tight. For a moment, it looked like they would break through. Then Ellison saw them. He banked Dove and brought his entire flight down with him. 8 Mustangs hit 20 FW-190s in a coordinated, devastating attack. Carson fired first. His tracers shredded through a 190's cockpit. Then Ellison hammered another from a high-angle roll. 3 more Mustangs tore into the formation from the left, 2 from the right. The German fighters scattered like startled birds. Within 30 seconds, 6 had been hit. The bombers didn't lose a single plane. The Luftwaffe squadron leader screamed over his radio, "Break off! Break off! We cannot hold the altitude!" His voice wasn't angry. It was defeated. The tactic, the one they'd relied on for years, had died right there in the cold German sky. At 11:42 a.m., something unprecedented happened. The entire Luftwaffe wing disengaged, not to reposition, not to regroup, not to plan a new attack. They disengaged to survive. German pilots fled at full throttle, not to fight again, but to live long enough to fly tomorrow. Bomber gunners watched in disbelief as the black dots retreated. One gunner said it out loud, "Boys, I think this is the day the Germans realized the sky ain't theirs anymore." The smoke trails from the retreating FW-190s and Bf-109s hung in the air, long after the last German fighter disappeared into the distant haze. The sky was quiet again, but not with the eerie silence of fear that had haunted bomber crews for months. This was a new kind of silence, a victorious silence, a turning point. Inside the cockpit of his P-51, Captain Ellison took a long breath, staring at the bomber stream stretching across the sky like a steel spine. Every fortress was still in formation. Every liberator still held altitude. No gaps, no lonely stragglers falling behind, no burning engines spiraling toward the earth. For the first time in the entire war, Ellison was escorting a bomber formation that looked whole. His wingman's voice cracked through the radio. "Boss, did we just go the whole run without losing a single fort?" Ellison didn't answer immediately. He scanned the horizon again. He checked the altitudes. He even dipped his wing and made a sweeping left turn to visually confirm the rear formation. Finally, he spoke. "Yeah, we did." There was pride in his voice, but there was also disbelief, and beneath it all, a deep, quiet sorrow, because he knew how many lives could have been saved if the P-51 had come earlier. Below them, inside the bomber cockpits, the realization hit just as hard. Lieutenant Tom Grayson, pilot of a B-17 named Dakota Dancer, held the controls with trembling hands. He kept looking around out the left window, the right window, over the nose. His co-pilot laughed. "What's wrong with you?" Grayson didn't take his eyes off the sky. "I'm checking for burning forts," he said quietly. "I'm used to seeing at least 5 or 6 by now." The co-pilot's smile faded, because it was true. Every veteran bomber crewman carried the ghosts of missing ships, the ones that used to fly beside them earlier in the war. Entire crews they ate breakfast with, vanishing in smoke and fire by noon. But not today. Today, something impossible had happened. The Luftwaffe had failed, completely, utterly, publicly. Meanwhile, the German side of the war was experiencing the same moment, but through a much darker lens. In a bunker near Berlin, General Adolf Galland, the Luftwaffe's most respected ace and inspector of fighter forces, slammed his fist against the map table. The intelligence officer stood stiffly at attention, delivering the report. "Sir, the Mustang stayed with the bombers for the entire duration of their mission." Galland's jaw tightened. He already knew. Every instinct told him that the day would come. He had warned Goering, warned Hitler, warned half the command structure, but they hadn't listened. Now the report lay on the table in front of him. 17 German fighters destroyed, 22 damaged, 0 bombers destroyed, 0 Mustangs shot down. Whispered the sentence no one else dared speak. "This is the end of our air superiority." Another officer spoke hesitantly. "Perhaps it is just one mission." Galland cut him off sharply. "This victory will repeat itself tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. As long as the Americans have the P-51, we cannot contest the daylight sky." Then he said something even more shocking, something Luftwaffe pilots would later remember, as the moment the truth broke through the propaganda. "We do not control the air anymore." The room went silent. The German air war, the campaign that once terrorized Europe, had just crossed the point of no return. Back in the sky, the Mustang pilots formed up for the flight home. Lieutenant Carson pulled his P-51 alongside Ellison's and gave a thumbs up through the canopy. Ellison returned it, but his expression was distant, thoughtful. Carson keyed his mic. "You okay?" Boss. Ellison hesitated, just thinking. About what? Ellison's eyes narrowed as he watched the bomber stream glittering in the afternoon light. Remember all those missions before we got the Mustang? The ones where we'd escort the forts halfway and then turn back? Carson didn't respond. He didn't need to. They all remembered. Ellison continued. We'd leave them, knowing the Luftwaffe was waiting, knowing what would happen. The channel was quiet for a long moment. Then Ellison said the words that captured the meaning of the day. Today, we didn't leave them. As they crossed into friendly airspace, the ground controllers could hardly believe what they were seeing. Bomber stream approaching. Still intact. Repeat. Bomber stream intact. Escort still overhead. Mustang still with them. Good God. At the base, mechanics, medics, and ground crew ran onto the tarmac as the first P-17s came in. They counted them, again and again. One mechanic whispered, "They're all here." A bombardier climbed out of the nose of his plane, tears running down his face. He grabbed a P-51 crew chief by the shoulders. "Your boys saved us. You hear me? They saved us all." The crew chief nodded slowly, because he already knew. History would later mark this day with a simple sentence. The Luftwaffe lost the war in the air the moment the P-51 gained the range to follow the bombers to the target and back. But for the men who were there, for the pilots, the gunners, the mechanics, the commanders, the meaning was deeper. This was the day the Germans realized the truth. The sky belonged to the Mustang now, and it wasn't giving it back. In the briefing room that evening, Ellison closed the mission log. He looked at his men, sweaty, exhausted, oil-stained, shaken, but alive. "We made history today," he said quietly. "Not because we beat the Luftwaffe, but because we finally kept our promise to the bombers." Every pilot in the room nodded, because they understood. The P-51 hadn't just changed the war. It had rewritten the sky.